Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge. I am Jon Najarian. My brother Pete and I are going to break down three different appearances of unusual option activity. And we're going to tell you what that is and why it matters. That's why you tune in to the Rebel's Edge. Bang! Bang.
Here we go, man. Here we go. We missed you yesterday.
Over there.
Yeah.
Since I've been on the road a lot in the last 2 weeks, Pete in particular, and so many people come up to me and say, "Hey, Pete, how's it going?" I always tell them, "Yeah, pretty good. Get the hell out of here."
Thanks.
So
Thanks a lot.
Everybody thinks Pete's a real dick.
That's fantastic.
Instead of the nice guy that he is. So sorry about that, Pete.
Oh, it's all good.
I was in Napa, I was in New York, I was in New Jersey, I was in Montecito, and traveling through a bunch of different airports like Phoenix and Denver and so forth. And I'm like, out of the way. God, that Pete's a dick.
God, he's a real tool. Thanks a lot, by the way.
No problem, Pete. Welcome to the Rebel's Edge, folks. Unusual option activity, that's when we see large blocks of calls or puts that are purchased on the offer. We don't care about sold, because if somebody sells an option, great for them. But that's not telling you market direction. If they're selling an option, that's all they can make. They sell it for $1, they sell it for $5. That's all they can make. Somebody buys an option for $2, they could get out of that at 2, 4, 20, 50, whatever. I mean, in other words, it's got unlimited only by, I guess, the law of large numbers, Pete. It's got unlimited upside. So we care about the purchase of options, not the sale of options. But let's dive into Macro Minute, Pete.
Yep.
And I'm going to say Macro Minute today is the retail sales. And depending which source you used for your news, folks, they'll say, well, it indicated solid consumer health. No, it didn't. Retail sales were up 0.1%. Now, that's fine. But how much of that was on Klarna? How much of that was on Affirm? Buy now, pay later. Different even than the credit cards, folks, because I think many of these credit cards are maxed out. So if you want to tell me that this is a great retail sales number, I'm going to say it was better than the average number of analysts that had predicted that it would decline. But other than that, I don't think it was a great number. What's your macro, Pete?
I'm just going to hit right there where it is in the heart right now. I'm going to go right with the Fed, John. The next couple of days are going to be pretty interesting. I look over at the Fed, first time in 4 years, they're talking about a cut. It's going to be a cut. It's now just a matter of, is it 50 basis points? That's at 65% now, which is pretty interesting. Or is it 25 basis points, which is what we've all thought for a long period of time? That's only at 35%. So when you look at these percentages and you see the direction we're going, I guess the one thing that I would be concerned about potentially would be, hey, look, if they're looking for 50, does the market get spooked by that? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe folks have gotten themselves into the position where they're going to be okay with that. I don't really know the answer to that one, but this big push on the 50, if it goes to a quarter, I think that's probably something that is definitely baked in and expected, and that'll be fine. 50, I got to figure there might be some sellers out there, John. And by the way, the volumes last week, very much like this week. This week, yesterday, 39 million contracts traded, John, before we get into the Fed conversation. Why is that? Because people don't really understand where they want to be right now. Last week, before CPI and PPI, it absolutely dried up. Next thing you know, it goes from 40 million back up to 50 plus million per day in the options world. So a lot of folks are kind of just sitting and waiting. And I think that's probably, in many cases, probably the right thing to do, unless you feel like you understand this well enough and you know the direction this is going to go.
Yeah, and none of us really know, but we read the tea leaves, and that's all you can do. Unless you're a member of the FOMC, guys, right now it's 60-40. That they're going to cut 50 basis points. 60% of the bets right now are on that side. I think with Pete's great analysis there, that that would be taken as maybe they're panicking because things really are slowing as much as I think they are. All right, Pete, we're going to hit fantastic futures quick, and I'm going to say crude oil topping 71 after trading 65 last week is a big deal. What do you have to say about the VIX?
I would just say that volatility is very interesting, John. You go back to the middle of July up until the August 5th date, and you had a pretty decent range. Call it 16 to 18. Where are we right now? 16 to 17. It's a really tight range, but that is where we are. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Fed and some of the reaction to the Fed, what is that going to do to volatility? Is it going to spike back up again like we just were? Or do we get a little bit closer to 16? Maybe we even break through 16. That's going to be an interesting challenge, but it is a very tight market right now for volatility.
Well, let's talk about a good market for Intel, Pete.
Yeah.
Because Intel is a stock that has not done well this year. Intel, if this was your pick, folks, for, oh yeah, I'm going to pick Intel as the one tech stock I should have because you know what? It just looks like it's oversold. Well, you would have been wrong because Intel, beginning of this year, this stock was basically 31.88. Or no, I'm sorry, I misstated. It was 45, Pete. 45 bucks beginning of this year. Coming into today, it was below 20. And now we have another mistake because somebody bought a ton of calls last week with the unusual option activity, but they didn't give themselves enough time to be right. If they picked September 19th, if they would have picked a date in this week rather than last week, Pete, they'd be happy campers. They are not happy campers, though, because all of those calls that they bought, ripped up. But if you would have been in there and bought the at the monies, you'd still have been okay. But man, not as well as if you bought something that had a little more time. Time and strike price are what you need to know, what you have to be able to trade to make money in options. And this is an example of one that didn't work out so well.
Right. They sniffed it out, but unfortunately the timing was off. And that does happen. It happens in a lot of cases, but it is still something that we follow very closely. And you could see it was a fairly inexpensive, cheap shot that they were taking on these in the first place. And had they been right on the timing side of it, they really would have had a pretty nice home run hit, but they were not in this particular case. I'll tell you what, John, you were talking about where it started off the year. It started up there in the upper 40s. It actually got up as high as 51. It pulled back to 30. And next thing you know, it's in the 20s. And it's been absolutely just sort of buried down there until today. And now this expanding relationship that they've got with AWS, with Amazon, is pretty incredible as far as these AI chips that'll be custom for them. That's pretty impressive, I think. That's a partnership that's going to be great from a strategic standpoint. Everything that they're looking for right now, it's in the data center. It's all of these various things. I think it's going to be big, and it should be big because we're talking about $7.8 billion that Amazon is investing into this whole thing. So this is going to be a very interesting partnership going forward. And I think it's pretty bullish overall for Intel at this point in time.
Well, how about something that's bullish for Microsoft, Pete? Microsoft is a clear out performer. When you look at this one, it is my second largest position, I'm happy to say. The stock traded to 441 today, folks. Now, has it been higher? Yeah, back in July, the stock was higher. It was more like 400 and what is that, Pete? 470 or something like that. But it's on its way back because they just increased the dividend. And you know what? They had unusual activity in this one too, folks. What were they buying? Something out there in March, way out there in March. So this is a long-term bullish trade for 1 million shares because 10,000 options, every option's for 1,000 shares. This is a 1 million share trade. That would make it a $460 million bet that this goes a lot higher, Pete.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive what they're doing, John. They raised their dividend. They raised the yield by 10%. Then you look over at the share pricing, the repurchase that they're doing. $60 billion in buybacks. That's a pretty monstrous number. Like I say, I think the one thing in this name, and I love this name too, I'm right there with you, John. The CEO's done a magnificent job of directing this company from a CEO who really, unfortunately, had really lost his way. And this turnaround has been great. I mean, it's multi years at this point in time, but this just continues to be one of the stocks that we look at because of the impressive moves that it has made. It's trading at a 32 PE right now. In the past, it seems like 24, 25 was sort of the going rate in terms of where Microsoft is. So are they a little bit inflated? Maybe. But the earnings are probably growing enough that I think that this stock can continue to move to the upside. And that's why I think we're seeing some of the unusual option activity that we're seeing right now. I don't think this is over. It's gotten as close to 470 as you could get. I think it was like 468. I think this is one of those stocks that sees 500 probably in the next 8 or so months.
Well, it very well might, and that bet at 460 would certainly pay off for the option buyer of those 10,000 March 460 calls. All right, let's talk about Ryanair. No, we didn't have unusual activity in Ryanair. You have to wait one more stock for the more unusual activity. But Ryanair, moving to the upside, Michael O'Leary talked about this, and Pete and I covered it last week. He sees improved booking momentum, which is what any airline wants to report. And because they're seeing that, he's not going to have as many fare discounts, Pete. Even though this is a deep discount airline already, to get people to fill up the planes, they had to have fare discounts. They don't have to have those anymore, Pete.
Yep. The only problem I see right now, John, is he talked about the CEO. It talked about the profits, the full year profits, and that they will be below last year. But on the positive side, to your point, the fare discounts, that's something that they don't have to deal with as heavily as that they were. The booking improvements, absolutely, that's a home run. They're also talking about delivery of some of those Boeing 737 MAX 10s, John. So that's something they don't have a time frame and so forth exactly out there, but those deliveries are expected. So is the stock up 5% for the right reasons? I'd say that it is. It's been as high as 150. Today it's sitting right around 111. This is a stock that still has plenty of room to the upside, but it's going to take some time because we all know people are strapped, but they are starting to pay up a little bit more. And I think that's a very good sign for all the airlines.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that crude oil, instead of moving to, for instance, 90 or whatever, Pete, is back down and finally back over 70, 71. If you long crude, that's good. If you're not, you're somebody who's really benefiting in a large way. Shippers benefiting, airlines benefiting, anybody, these over-the-road truckers and things benefiting. All right, now for the third of our unusual activity, Pete, and it's going to be HPE, a stock that on the 10th, a week ago today, the stock was trading down hard. I think it was down like 11 or 12% on that day. And Pete said, buy it. And was he right? Well, it turns out there was unusual activity. So somebody might have been listening to Pete when he said, buy it down there. And how has that trade worked out? Well, you tell me. There's the October 17 calls that were bought when the stock traded down to 1655. Today, the stock rocking and rolling to the upside, Pete. HPE is. It gets like a Bank America upgrade. It traded as high today as 1840. That's nearly $2 higher, folks. Almost back to where it was before that big drop that we talked about a week ago.
Well, one of the things that I saw there, John, was it just seemed like it finally got beat up enough that it was probably time to turn and burn. And the reason I said that was I was looking at the PE in single digits. I mean, you're looking at profit to earnings, and you're in the 8s or 9s, and that's a forward-looking thing. That's a pretty interesting level, and I thought it made some sense. Now all of a sudden you've got this analyst out there who's also talking about, hey, prices going from 21 to 24 or whatever it is. I think Bank of America is probably right here. Has it been beat up a lot? Yes. Have they bought something that's really going to be very moving for them? I think so. They got that Juniper thing, John. We're talking about a $14 billion acquisition. That could be something that really makes them a lot more cost efficient. That's why I think people are starting to wake up a little bit to HPE.
Well, it would have been great timing if you bought the stock last week, folks, But if you bought the options, how well did you do in those options? I mean, buying those options gave you the leverage to make hundreds, plural, hundreds of percent return versus, oh yeah, great. You made 12% or 14% if you bought it at 16.55 and it went to 18.40. You decide. All right.
It's not an option.
It's not an option. That's right. It's not an option to just trade stocks. It's not an option.
It's not an option.
You got to get the book, folks. Go to itsnotanoption.com. And the book's free. Shipping will cost you $9 or so. Mm-hmm. All right.
Here's what we got, John. We're going to start off with something in the NFL that people just don't recognize, and they don't want to recognize it. And I think it's worth it for us to actually show something here. So what am I talking about? Who are the two most clutch quarterbacks right now in the NFL? Obviously, everybody's going to say, well, it's got to be Patrick Mahomes. It's got to be whomever else that they want to pick out of there, John. Is it Josh Allen? Well, here's something that I think people should actually think about a little bit. And I've heard a lot of negativity on both these two names. One of them, Kirk Cousins. Since 2015, so basically we're going back, we're looking at about a 9 or 10 years worth of football, right? Depending on how you want to look at it this year. He's had 6 go-ahead touchdowns in either the final minute of regulation or of overtime. Now, that says to me that you're a clutch player. You know who else is pretty clutch? Derek Carr. Derek Carr actually has 8 different instances where he's done the same thing, John. And right now this year, let's see, Derek Carr seems to be doing pretty damn good down there in New Orleans. Their scoring has got to be leading the NFL right now. And Kirk Cousins, all he did was go last night. Now, this is a guy who's coming off an Achilles, right? He went up last night to Philadelphia, kind of lit him up. He drove him downfield, and they got him an opportunity, and they won the football game, last minute of the game. In a minute and 5 seconds, he went basically 70 yards, John, against a defense that most people consider to be one of the best defenses in football. Then you look over at Derek Carr, and you go, look, this guy is 77% right now on his completions. He's got 5 touchdowns. He's got 1 interception. I would say that a lot of people really don't understand football if they really don't understand how clutch these two guys are when it matters. And it's one thing to just go down the field, and all the rest of it. But when there's just a couple minutes left on the clock, that's when it's time to be clutch. And that's when these two guys step up.
Well, Pete, Derek Carr, who I'll start with him. Like you said, he's averaging 221 yards a game. 5 touchdowns is what he's thrown so far this year. 3 in the first game, 2 in the second. And his QB rating, Pete, QBR, 142. So there's a lot of fantasy players that wish they had that guy. Kevin O'Connell, by the way, Pete, the quarterback, the offensive coordinator, I think, up there in
head coach.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
He has got Sam Darnold looking like he should be the second pick in the draft because that guy, all he did was throw a 97-yarder to Justin Jefferson. That was amazing. He's deep in his own end zone, Pete, when he threw that ball. And, obviously Justin did a lot with his legs, but he just ran right by those San Francisco D-backs. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And like I say, as far as Derek Carr, they've scored 40-plus points in both games, Pete. Mm-hmm. So it's not just Dallas that suffered under Derek Carr, and suffer they did at home. But how about this, Pete? Just lighten it up. I thought that was fantastic. And I think Derek Carr finally might be at the team that he needed, Pete.
Yeah, no, it's a great start so far. It's really early, and Sam Darnold, you have to give him a lot of credit. And the coach has done a great job. Everybody calls him the quarterback whisperer, and so far so good. It's early, so we shouldn't jump the gun too much. And I will say this: San Francisco is a great football team, but they had so many players that were sitting out, John, because of contracts and so forth. I don't think they looked like they were in football shape. Those guys had their hands on their hips. They were tired, and that was in the first quarter. That was in the first series practically. So right. They have some issues going on in San Francisco. They will be great, but they're not great right now because they're not in football shape. All right, so we're only 2 weeks in. What's the best-looking team right now, do you think, in the NFL, John? I'll throw mine out. I think it's Buffalo. And the reason I say that is it's not so much the competition, although it kind of is, but their first game was against Arizona. Now, a lot of people would say, well, Pete, Arizona's really not all that great. Keep an eye on that Arizona offense this year. I mean, they got Harrison Jr. on the outside. He's a big athletic receiver who barely got the ball early on, but this past week had a great week, and Arizona looks like they can light it up right now. That offense is pretty impressive. But Buffalo beat them. Then Buffalo went on the road to Miami, and they beat Miami. Now, they lost the quarterback, but they didn't lose him right away or anything. But they lost the quarterback, obviously the concussion thing, and prayers are out to the quarterback, Tua. But I'll tell you, Buffalo looks good on offense. Buffalo looks good on defense. I think Buffalo right now is probably the best team in the NFL. And I say that, John, because just yesterday we were talking about that division out there in the AFC. Baltimore is 0-2. That's not such a great start. I mean, there are some problems going on out there. Cincinnati is 0-2. They've got some problems, and both of them have different defensive problems. One can't stop the run, the other can't stop the pass. So until they get that figured out, Buffalo's looking pretty damn good right now to me.
Well, I'll say this, Pete. The Saints, best team.
Yep.
And the reason I will say that and stick by it at least for a while here, Pete, is not just Derek Carr, it's the defense.
Yeah.
I mean, last year, Dak Prescott, the reason he got that big contract this year was because last year he threw 36 touchdown passes. I mean, if you look at the stats, he led the league in touchdowns. The team looked great until the playoffs, which Dallas always sucks these days in the playoffs. But and Skip Bayless hates it, and Stephen A. loves giving him crap about it, Pete. Just lit him up, of course. But they've got 2 touchdowns, Pete. 2. Mm-hmm. And the Saints look like a defense. If you can shut down a team with as many weapons as Dallas quite obviously has, and you shut them down to, what was it, Pete? Was it 19 points? Was it 40-19 or something like that? Yeah. For God's sake, that defense deserves a lot of credit. 19 should be enough if your defense is stout for you to win a football game. Now, I know in the NFL, it's an offensive-minded deal. Everything favors the offense. I get it. But scoring 19 ain't the worst thing in the world. But that defense was able to keep Prescott and the Cowboys on their back feet, not on their front foot. And I think that's going to be a difference maker. And by the way, you got to play in the dome. You got to play in the Mercedes Dome or whoever's got their name on it now. I think it's the Caesars Dome, Pete. I think it's Caesars Gambling Dome. But that gets loud. And this game was not played there. So look for these guys to light it up when they're playing at home, too.
And when you point out that defense, John, they still got Cameron Jordan, Steve Jordan's son, who's been unbelievable. Berkeley kid, pretty damn smart guy on top of everything else. I mean, they got Demario Davis. He's a linebacker that people don't know well enough because he's one of the best linebackers in all of football. Fred Warner's number 1. This guy's somewhere floating around near number 2. And then they've got Tyrann Mathieu as well. So they've got a lot of different players, a lot of different positions. And the Honey Badger is always going to be difficult. You look at that New Orleans team, you start saying, wow, where's the weakness? They got a good offensive line. They got a great running back, a quarterback who can't get stopped right now, and a bunch of young receivers. I would say that right now they're looking at a pretty good spot, and that's your NFC team. I got your AFC team. There's the Super Bowl right there, 2 weeks in. It's way too early, guys. It's way too early.
Well, remember, it's not an option. When you're gambling on football, it's not an option to miss Pete on his show Sundays from 11 till 1 Eastern time. We always put a link to it, and it's a great – by the way, Pete went 9 out of 10 against the spread, right, Pete?
I did, yep, last week in college football.
9 out of 10. So if you're a gambler, we might have to start featuring that here, Pete, on the Thursday program. Since that's the last one of the week, we might have to, and you could feed it into Sunday Night Football too.
Yeah, maybe
Thursday night. Sorry.
Maybe I submit it to the people watching. I submit what the 10 picks are.
There you go. Well, we appreciate all of you tuning in, folks. Thank you. We hope you join us again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Pete and I will be back. See you then.